I literally sold everything I own, so I don't own anything more in life. And I moved to Bangalore. I was contemplating about what to do. I had more than enough money in the bank. And one of the rules and one of the things I've seen is when you have too much money in life, you normally end up doing something reasonably stupid.
Today's episode on Success Documented is with Mr. Ranganath Thota. With extensive experience in the corporate world, working across 20 states in India as well as China and Southeast Asia, he launched Hindustan Times in Bombay, marketed for Pepsi in West Mumbai, and set up one of the first Indian startups in China with funding from SoftBank. I came across him and his work when I took part in a fundraiser by FuelADream, the philanthropic organization that he founded and currently runs. How are you today?
Good, very, very good. Lovely
So,
to be here.
starting off, like, w- how does your how was your childhood? How was your school life, and did that in some way impact what you do now?
So, Shivan, I, grew up in a very interesting environment. Uh, so you could define us as a very middle class family. But my father was in the defense forces. And what we did over there is we traveled a lot because he kept getting posted to different places. And we studied in so many different schools in so many different places. So at a very young age, we got used to diversity. We got used to frequent change. And that seemed very, very normal. And you met people across different cultures, you were exposed to different languages, different practices, and you learned a lot from that. So it wasn't that you stayed in the same place for 15, 20, and 18 years of your life and you just had one environment. The environment kept changing. And that helps you a lot, in the corporate world, because change is something that you find normal. So for a lot of people in the corporate world, the business world, change is chaotic. But for me, it was completely normal. So that made it very, very easy to do things in the corporate world because you're used to change. You know, so it's like tomorrow, you're a fit person, you can run easily, but a person who's not finds it extremely difficult to. So that made it very easy to understand consumer behavior, made it very easy to look at opportunities in terms of business because you thought in a manner where change did not matter to you. So that made a big, big, difference. And you grew up with people, who are very, very diverse in nature, both in terms of thought process, in terms of, how they looked, in terms of how they thought, in terms of the languages. So we used to that also. So that again makes it very, very easy. So even if you go to a foreign market, you never felt it was foreign. So when I moved to China, it seemed very normal to me because you're used to change. So for most people, China would seem alien in the beginning, but for me, it was like, okay, it's just a new place. That's it. And you know exactly what to do in a new place. And that makes it very, very, very simple, to fit in anywhere in the world. So that really.
Yeah, what you brought up about living foreign. I spent most of my life in Dubai personally, and I don't think people realize how much of a difference it actually makes when you have two different perspectives rather than just one from one city or one country. And yeah, that definitely probably would have helped you a lot. But as an extension to that, did you like have any dreams or ambitions about entrepreneurship or working in the corporate? Was that kind of something you always wanted to do?
So I guess at a young age, uh, you know, with the defense environment, sometimes the ambition was to be in the defense. But as you grew up in those days, typically, you had two, three very simple ambitions. You either wanted to be an engineer or you wanted to be a doctor. Or if you didn't do well, you then figured out what else to do. So typically you had three choices at that point of time. So that is how, we looked at things from a lens and, we had very little access to information, right? So that was really what our perspective is when we were growing.
Hmm. That's interesting. So, since you said that wasn't really your ambition, what was your journey of stumbling unwillingly into the corporate world like? Was it through college? Was it like
Yeah, that's it. So I guess I was a reasonably good student, so I ended up being an engineer.
mm,
And I had reasonably good marks, so I got the electronics and telecom
mm,
engineering group. And I guess 1 year into engineering, I realized that this is not what I'm cut out to do. But I still had 3 more years to go, so I did complete it. But the advantage of being an engineer was I was very clear that I didn't want to do it.
Mm.
Right? And I was fascinated at that point of time with business. And I was very clear that, yes, I will be in the corporate world. I loved consumer behavior, so the marketing angle always played out. Uh, I moved again from being an extremely shy child to an extrovert when I was in engineering. And I was a very, very reluctant, shy kid before that. So by the time I finished engineering, I was very clear I wanted to be a corporate person. I wanted to do my MBA, and that's what I did, and then joined the corporate world.
You said you were shy?
Extreme. I was an introvert, extremely shy when it came to the public side of it. With friends, I wasn't, but to the outside world, I was an extremely shy kid until I was forced to get up on stage, in engineering, and I loved it. And then it was difficult to get me off stage.
I mean, it's difficult to see that you used to be shy. You're like the most charismatic person in the room the whole time, always.
So I guess all of us change at some point of time, and you never know when you're going to change. So a lot of times, for parents, sometimes I tell parents, don't put undue pressure on children because they will bloom when you don't know.
Eventually.
And the circumstances under which they bloom are different. So let them be, they will transform, and they will get to what they have to get. And you don't know when it would happen. For some kids, it would happen at, maybe when they're 14. For some, it's 18. Some of them maybe at 30. Right? Some people become extremely successful at 60. So, life is unpredictable and interesting, from that perspective.
Yeah. And so after engineering, you had a few earlier corporate roles, I believe. What would those be, and how did they shape your future corporate roles?
So the first role which I joined after my engineering and straight out of campus, we were selected, was with this company called Godrej. And I think Godrej for me was a really transformational experience because that company, the beautiful thing about Godrej is the value systems that company brings to the table, luckily, were absolutely in sync with my value systems. So they had extremely strong value systems, a very, very honest company, reasonably process driven, great people to work with, very, very focused. And we had a very dynamic leader at that point of time. And, working in that environment for the first 6 years of my corporate world was a fantastic foundation. So for a lot of people, the first job is very, very critical because it teaches you tenets, it teaches you fundamentals, which get kind of ingrained in you, and you believe this is what the corporate world is. So if your first experience, first 5 years, for example, is a bad one, I mean, it's very difficult to undo it. It takes a lot of effort to undo it. And if it's a fantastic one like mine with Godrej, I mean, you're lucky. So a lot of times your first job is very important. You can't just be driven by perception or salary or stuff like that. So working on Godrej, very, very diverse experience, traveled a lot, interacted with a lot of senior people, understood the market, worked in places like Haryana and Punjab and, Bombay and across the country, understood things. And because the value systems were sound, it was very easy to actually do business. But when value systems of companies are not in place, it's very stressful, very complicated. So Godrej is a kind of place where we loved going to work. And that's a rare thing in the first 5 years of your career. So we never complained, say, oh God, we've got work today. We really enjoyed it. We thrived in that environment. And we kind of loved being in the corporate world. And we learned a lot, gave it a lot. And, the company gave back to us. So it was a fabulous win-win.
Expanding on values, like in all the textbooks, it's like non-wage factors, fringe benefits. Values is never mentioned. Values can shape how a company, operates and how you operate within a company. So like if you were to point out, let's say 3 to 5 values which are essential for you to even think about working with a company, what would those be? And what do you think other people should have as that?
So the first thing about a company when you say values is honestly, genuinely integrated. I say that because that makes a big difference to everything you do. And you only do what is right and you never do what is wrong. And that makes decision making so easy. It makes interactions with people so easy. It's easy to say no because it's a given. You don't have to think about it. So integrity for me is a very, very fundamental value. The second thing is genuinely, having respect for one another. So a lot of times we say, companies say we are employee focused. That's easy to say, but genuinely you need to have, respect for each other. There needs to be empathy for people. So if you've got integrity, you're a people person, I guess you've covered almost 75, 80% of what you need to be as a great company. And then obviously, great companies, and that's difficult to choose. You need leaders who are transformational. Now that's luck. You could interview for a company, land up in a company with, great value systems, the right, kind of environment. But if your boss happens to be not a transformational person, not someone you learn from, then it becomes a little bit of a drag. So there's a little bit of a luck element, that's involved. But for me, fundamentally, I think integrity, respect for people are the fundamental values that you look for in most companies. There are so many others, but these two are the fundamental things, because you could have everything else, but if you don't have these two, then you're just a hollow shell. And that happens to be the values you need as an individual too. So most individuals who are extremely happy in life, genuinely, not because they have 1,000 crores stashed in the bank account, but are genuinely happy, are because they are fair, honest, and they actually respect everyone. That makes life very, very simple. And that's what's important.
Yeah. Moving on into your latter roles in the corporate world, I mean, there's a lot to unpack here, lots of experience. But how was it marketing for Pepsi in West Mumbai? I believe you were one of the first people who started to, really expand it in West Mumbai. How was the
So marketing in Pepsi in those days were a very interesting uh, role. We did. Mumbai was one of the key markets, in India, and even across the world, people looked at it. And when I joined Pepsi in those days, Pepsi was easily the strongest brand in the cola space in Mumbai. And there's something called, top of mind recall. The recalls in the cola segment for Pepsi versus Coke were possibly as high as 80%, right? So it was a very strong brand. And Pepsi was a very dynamic company in terms of they did things in those days which no other consumer companies did. And there was a lot of freedom to express yourself, to innovate. Again, the leadership over there was great. And it was easy for people who were smart and hardworking to thrive. So there was so much to do. So that was possibly one of the few companies where I felt we didn't have enough time, because there was so much you could do. And we did. And we had a very small team, but again, there was a lot of autonomy, there was a lot of freedom. You could express yourself, you could do stuff. It was also very exciting because you worked with, cricket stars, you worked with movie stars, you did stuff with music, you did with stuff with food, you did stuff with cricket, you worked with colleges, theaters, and there was so much happening. So typically, most companies would have, 3 interesting promotions in a month. We would have 3 a day, or 4 a day, or 8 a day happening across different channels. So when people would come to us to say, okay, what did you do last month? And we were sharing best practices. They say, how does a team of 4 people, in marketing manage 300, 400? But we had excellent sales teams first to support us. There was clear direction from the top. There was autonomy from Delhi saying, do what you want. So it was very easy to actually execute. And we had wonderful partners. Let's say there's a person who puts out hoardings, or there's a person who puts out banners, simple things like that. They normally wait 90 days, 120 days, 180 days for the money to come. And we told them that, look, once the work gets over, you give us the bills in 48 hours and we'll pay you in 48 hours. And they were so confused because they didn't understand why we were being so nice. But it made great business sense, because once we paid them very quickly, they gave us the best rates. They gave us the best holdings. They gave us the best of everything because the cash flows were good.
Yeah, there's this incentive to do
Yeah, so
that.
we suddenly became a smart client for them, saying, hey, service them best because they give us the money, right? And that became a differentiator. Made it very, very easy to do a lot of work. So suddenly, from suppliers, they became partners and they added value. So you could do a lot of very, very strategic, cool things like that.
And I presume the Coke Pepsi wars must have been brilliant, to
Oh,
say the
yes.
least. You want to talk about that?
No. So I guess it's a category where, you needed a lot of excitement, and that drove consumption. And it again became a part of the DNA and the culture of an organization where you competed. So, for example, I don't remember any friend of mine whose house I visited, where the first thing I did when I entered was to go to the refrigerator and open the fridge and find out what they had over there. And if, I guess only 10% of my friends possibly had that, if they had a cola drink which was not Pepsi, it would be drained and Pepsi would land up within 10 minutes at that house. But that's what drove us, to do amazing things.
Yeah, no, that's brilliant. And then moving on, you launched Hindustan Times in Bombay, the probably the biggest newspaper right now in India, one of them at least.
Yes.
And like launching it in Bombay, one of the biggest hubs in India. What was that like?
So actually, this was quite accidental because I remember, someone I know who had become the CEO of Hindustan Times, and the gentleman called me saying, "Look, Ranga, we are looking for a CEO in Mumbai, and can you recommend someone?" And I was actually working with a company in Goa at that point of time, and I did give him a few names, but end of the day, finally, I ended up joining them, and I obviously didn't come from the newspaper background, but even him, his name was Mr. Rajiv. So he and a lot of other people were not from the newspaper background because he was creating a new team. And Bombay was a very, very, very critical launch because Hindustan Times in those days was a very Delhi-centric paper. They had never really ventured out into a big market like Mumbai. And Mumbai was the cash cow for Times of India, right? So they minted money over here. And for Times of India, Mumbai was almost like a money-making machine. And they generated so much profit that unless you dented them there, you could never compete with them. So it was a very critical one. So it was a very challenging one. But again, we did a lot of interesting things. And we did something which possibly never happened before in the history of a newspaper launch. Day one of launch, and Times of India had a front page ad welcoming Hindustan Times to Bombay. Okay, it was very fascinating, and this was again thanks to the CEO and how we thought as a team. The reason is there was another paper called the DNA which was launching. So suddenly, Times of India realized, oh God, I've got two competitors coming, and they wanted to increase production, but they didn't have a plant in place. And Hindustan Times had a great plant, and we said, okay, we'll print Times of India for you in our plant if you want, because we have spare capacity, because that's money making for us, right? But we said, quid pro quo, while we do that, we want an ad in your paper. They said, what? We need to welcome you to our own city? And we said, yes. And we also wrapped up a huge building in South Bombay. The whole building was wrapped up as a newspaper saying, here. So we did a lot of cool things and great team, a lot of hard work. Launching a newspaper is not easy, very, very complicated to do. And that was a very interesting new experience, for the Hindustan Times.
Wrapping up a building is crazy. Yep, but believe it or not, that's not where it ends. You also set up one of the first Indian startups in China, getting funding from SoftBank. So, what was the startup?
So this was a company in India called Contest to Win. And I was working at that time with Pepsi. So I was the marketing person. And there was a gentleman called Alok Kejriwal who used to run Contest to Win. And he ended up meeting me in Pepsi. And they were a contesting website. And he wanted to do a lot of work with Pepsi. So we got into a deal in those days where we said, okay, Pepsi is a cool brand. Let's work with you. The other cool brand in those days used to be MTV, right? So they were one of the coolest pairs you could have as clients. And Alok had both MTV and Pepsi as clients. And we never paid him because we did a barter deal with him. And we did a lot of cool things. And that was using technology in those days. Okay, we never had smartphones and all that stuff. So that was a very cool thing to do. And I think Alok one day was talking to one of his investors. And he said, we've got this client called Ranga. He does a lot of great things with us, but he doesn't pay us. And the investor says, why doesn't he pay? He said, well, he doesn't. So the investor called me and said, look, why don't you pay Alok? And I said that because he never asked for money. He agrees to barter deals, so we do barter deals. So long story short, they said, look, why don't you come and join us? And I said, okay. And when I joined them, there was no revenue. in the first year itself, we grew so much of revenue overnight, and we did extremely well, and we had great numbers. And then we decided to do a joint venture, in China, and set up contests to win there. And when we went there, I realized the mobile market was huge. So we changed the business model from contesting using, laptops and computers to using phones. So we became a wireless mobile business called Mobile to It. And end of the day, that company was finally sold to Disney.
Oh.
Yeah, by Alok.
Oh, interesting.
So
And
that was again a very interesting story.
getting funding from I can't imagine that that would be easy getting funding from SoftBank. Like, what was the process? What were the challenges, and what do you recommend young entrepreneurs to do while trying to get funding? All three of those.
So I guess, one of the key things in life, and you need to practice it at the personal level and also at the corporate level, is the art of, one, being honest, and the second is the art of storytelling. You need to be able to take complex things and not make it simple, but make it simple and interesting and fascinating. So people listen to you. They don't just hear what you're saying, but they listen to you because it's fascinating. So you actually can't go into a pitch saying, I've got the best idea in the world and I will prove it to you. You need to tell a story where the person connects with it, saying, okay, this is interesting, this is fascinating, this sounds like something I want to be a part of. Or it sounds fascinating, but I definitely don't want to be a part of it because I'm clear about it, which is also fine. So you can't expect, to meet two people and say both rejected me, so I've got a terrible idea. Possibly they don't want to invest in a company, which possibly is good, but maybe it doesn't, sync with, their vision of what they want to invest in. But the thing is, if they like it, but they can't invest in it, they say, look, we think it's a great idea, but we honestly can't invest because of this reason. But maybe we'll put you on to people we know who like stuff like that. So a lot of times, most people I know, they communicate from their perspective. They don't understand the other person's perspective in terms of saying, look, they don't understand as much about my business as I do. So let me make it simple and explain. Right? And that's what. And it's also about how you communicate with people, how you discuss things with people, how so-called arguments happen. A lot of time arguments are because you're only looking at your point of view. You're not realizing that the other person doesn't understand you because of this reason. So you change your pitch so that they understand what you're trying to say. And then you know that they've understood it, but they still disagree, which is fine, but they've understood it. Right? So you need to learn the art of storytelling, for anything like a pitch. Very, very important.
Yeah, and what you said about understanding the other person's perspective, that reminds me of the book 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. Look for like a win-win rather than a win-lose or a lose-win. And that's when either you'll resolve the argument or at least understand each other better than you would have otherwise, right? And
so it's like, for example, let's say you're buying a house. And the final negotiated price is, let's say, 2 crores. Give the person 2 crore, 1 lakh. You will never have a problem when you sign the deal. Similarly, when you're selling your house and the person says 2 crores, you agree with it. The end you say, no, just give me 1.99 crores. You never have a problem with it. That's how you do business. And that's being smart. And that's how you build positive energy, you build great reputation. And the next time, if something happens where you need to interact with a person, he or she is more than willing to do business with you because their experience with you is phenomenal. See, we've never met someone like this. We just love it. We love this person. We want to do work with him. And that's the kind of person you're not to be. Not like, oh God, that deal was a bad one.
Yeah. And talking about it, you've been through pretty much every sector known to mankind. And you said your childhood helped you adapt and learn how to persevere through maybe unideal situations. What's your advice for people when they're switching from like a sector to a wildly different one?
So a lot of times, the fundamentals are usually the same in a lot of sectors. So for example, most of the sectors I've worked with are all consumer focused. Okay? So I've never, for example, moved from a consumer company into, let's say, a financial company or a bank. I've not done that because that's a massive sectoral change. So where I'm coming from is in the consumer segment, you have diverse businesses, but a lot of times the fundamentals are the same. I'll give an example of what I'm trying to say. A lot of times people will tell you, look, people in China are very different from people in India. Okay, people in the UK are very different from people in India. That's not true at all. Because once you break down people, fundamentally, when you break it down, you will say, okay, first, they're good people, they're bad people. That's it, just two kinds. Okay, and then there are certain behavioral traits which are the same that we have across the board. Fine, we might have different food tastes. That's okay. But the fundamentals are the same. We have ambition, yes, across everyone. We have fear across everyone. Fundamentals are the same. So same thing when you look at fundamentals of business and you look at companies across sectors which might seem different. The fundamentals are the same. Nothing much changes. You just need to learn them. And it's not rocket science. So tomorrow you could be selling soft drinks and the next day you're selling, let's say, biscuits. Okay. Third day you're selling newspapers. I mean, it's not that complicated. Okay. So the manufacturing process is slightly different here versus that. Fine, you can figure it out. And you anyway have smart people in the manufacturing space. As long as you build trust with them, they will unload and tell you everything that you need to know. But if you are not the kind of person people like, it'll take you 6 months to figure out what's wrong with it. But if they love you, you'll figure it out in 6 hours. So that's how it works.
So now that we've covered your corporate background, at least broadly, what motivated your transition to entrepreneurship with Golf Gaga, I believe?
So, working in the corporate world for a long time, sometimes you are very, very satisfied with the pace of growth, what's happening, the wealth creation. And sometimes you feel, you want to do something on your own. And I was a person who had worked in so many markets, worked with so many different people, seen so much of diversity. And I was full of ideas. And, when you're full of ideas and you're enthusiastic about life, you always want to create something, do something on your own and set up a firm with its own set of values, own set of rules, build, create. So that's how things worked out. And then I happened to leave a company and I was contemplating about what to do. And I accidentally picked up playing golf in China, completely by accident, because I used to be a squash player and a swimmer. And one day there were about 8 of us who would go out to play squash. And one day I came back after a 3-week trip and I was suddenly told that all these guys have gone for golf coaching. So they're not available for the next 1 month. And I said, how could you do that without telling me? And they said, well, you were on a break. So long story short, I went to the golf range and I was watching them playing and they kept missing the ball. And one of them said, look, why don't you hit it? And I said, okay, what do I need to do? And he said, this is what you need to do. And I hit the ball exactly the way he told me. And the coach comes and says, how long have you been playing golf? I said, this is the first time I swung a club. He said, seriously? You actually took a 7-iron and you hit it 150 yards and you never hit a club before? I said, no. So the next day I was I was back on the course and I played a round of golf in 24 hours of picking a club. And that's how I got into golf. So when I decided to start something, I said, okay, let me do something around the space of golf. That's how I got into it.
You said you were a swimmer?
Yeah, I used to swim.
Oh, I did nationals in swimming
Oh,
about a year ago.
okay.
So, what's your favorite stroke in swimming?
Freestyle.
Freestyle. Okay.
I used to do it in about 100 meters in about a minute and 4 seconds.
A minute and 4. Oh,
Just to be very good at it.
Wow, that's great. So, like, with golf, well, what can you explain exactly what Golf Gaga was?
So Golf Gaga was completely a work of mad passion. So what I did is I decided that, because I played golf in India too, I said, people didn't know much about golf in terms of the golf courses outside their city. And golf was just a growing sport at that point of time. So I decided I would create a portal where almost everything about golf would be available in one place in India. So what I did is I traveled about 1 lakh of kilometers driving in India. So I was in Hyderabad in those days. So right from Hyderabad to Jammu and Kashmir, I actually drove, okay, and set up this platform where I played about 150 golf courses in India and took pictures of them, mapped them. So you could come to the site and decide how to play any golf course. I mean, those days we didn't have technology, and we had golf travel. So I traveled across the world, got a lot of content for Philippines and Thailand and stuff like that, so people could travel with us for golf holidays. So we did all that. Uh, but the revenue model for that business was okay. It wasn't great. And you didn't generate too much of revenue out of the website, you generated it out of travel. And for me, that was slowly not beginning to make sense. Saying, look, you can't, because then you become a travel company. Then golf is not really what your core. So we did a lot of stuff. We were a small team of just 4 or 5 people. But I realized it's not really going to be a sustainable business over a period of time. And that's when I said, okay, so I spent about 5, 6 years investing in it, learned a lot, but then I also realized this is not going to work. And thankfully, I stopped it. And after some time, the COVID hit us, and most golf businesses just disappeared at that point of time. But I'd done it much before that. So one of the things about being an entrepreneur is also being able to admit when something is not going to work, and then say, okay, that's enough. Let me stop, cut my losses, and continue. If you fall too much in love with your ideas and you keep doing it, knowing at the back of your mind that it's not going to work, then it becomes very, very frustrating. Right? So that was what the golf was.
I think you've mentioned something very interesting there, for falling in love with your ideas and not being able to admit when it's not going to work. I often find that the opposite takes place. Like some teenager finds drop shipping online, like, yeah, I'm gonna become rich, and they start doing it and they're like, why don't I have clients in 3 days? And when do you know that it's reasonable for me to quit now because I've done all that I could and it won't work out? When do you find that divide?
So the first problem with creating these companies and ideas is if you're doing this only to be rich, then 90% of ideas don't work out. I think the whole objective of creating something is to say, I'm going to make life more interesting, more fascinating, or easier, or more efficient for people. And because I provide value, people will end of the day pay me. And logically, then things will happen. But the fundamental focus has to be, how do I transform the lives of either 1 million people, or 10 million people, or 100 million people? And how do I do it using my great idea and technology and a great team? And when that happens, automatically good things will happen. But if your objective is, how quickly do I become a millionaire and a billionaire, then you will never get it right, or you will rarely get it right. Because then your focus is on making money rather than the fundamentals of your business, right? And when you're focused on making change, then the first thing is winning over customers. And once you win over customers, you realize how easy it is to do that. And that's when you realize how good your business is.
Yeah. I think that's brilliant what you've said there. That's something all the viewers should like probably note down as well, and think about that. But so once you've, I presume, closed Golf Gaga or stopped working in it formally, you went on to start a non-profit, which I believe is a first for you.
Yeah, so FuelADream is actually a for-profit, which currently doesn't make money.
Yeah.
Okay, but it will.
Okay.
And this was an interesting journey because, I was contemplating about what to do. I had more than enough money in the bank. And one of the rules and one of the things I've seen is when you have too much money in life, you normally end up doing something reasonably stupid. So I'd actually grown up in Goa, and I decided one day that I'd seen this very cool, cute looking island in Goa. And I decided I was actually going to buy it. And I kind of negotiated and almost did everything with it. And then thankfully, a few days before, actually signing the deal, I thought about it and realized, this is again one of those assets which is possibly going to fascinate me for 6 months. And maybe fascinate my friends for a longer period of time. I would get bored with it in some time. And I realized helping others was something which really got me excited. But I didn't want to help 2 or 3 or 4 people. I said, okay, if you're reasonably smart, figure out a way to help 1 million. And one of my friends did mention crowdfunding and said, why don't you check it out? And I went online, read about it for half an hour, and I said, okay, this is definitely going to work. So what I did about 8 years back is I literally sold everything I own. So I don't own anything more in life. And I moved to Bangalore and started this crowdfunding platform called FuelADream. And what we do through FuelADream is we mainly work with a lot of nonprofits. We make a lot of social impact. We also work with people who have great creative ideas and want to, build electrical cycles or smart wallets or cool jackets or build music albums. So you can fund both creative ideas and social impact, on FuelADream.
Mhm. Yeah, and talking about projects, my personal favorite would be the e-bike one. What would your favorites be? What were the ones which you found most interesting or
Yeah, that's
impactful?
actually a lot of them are really, really fascinating. But top of mind, if you ask me, e-bike was a very interesting one for us simply because it was one of the first product-led campaigns that we ever did. Electric bikes were in their infancy. We had this wonderful entrepreneur from Coimbatore by the name of Manikandan who came to us with this idea. Uh, we knew a little bit about crowdfunding, even though we were a platform. It was a first for us. He trusted us and said, okay, let's make this work. And it was very fascinating that, we were actually able to help him and his team, raise in those days a massive amount of 65 lakhs in terms of pre-orders for a bike. And at least 60% of those people who ordered the bike hadn't even seen the product. They just read about it and said, okay, let's do this. And it was a huge amount of money to raise for a product 8 years back. There were not too many bikes of that kind. So that was a great project. We also did something very fascinating called the Tiffy template, which was a very cool product for the visually impaired. And this helped the visually impaired people recognize an Indian currency note in 4 seconds.
Oh,
And the reason is that 7 out of 10 visually impaired people, when they go to a shop and they give them money, they give a 50 rupee note, and the shopkeeper could always tell them that you give me a 20 rupee note. And there's no way to prove that I gave you a 50. So there was this little cute device. All you had to do is wrap your note around it, measure it. You could do it visually if you're visually impaired. Just measure the length and breadth. And this was done by an entrepreneur in Bangalore called Paul. And we actually raised, money for 500,000 of those. And that was a very fascinating one. We built a lot of canals for villagers in drought-affected areas of Maharashtra and crowd-funded it. So there were a lot of very, very fascinating ones we did. And possibly the most impactful was a campaign we did for a person called Mallesham in Hyderabad. He built this amazing machine for weavers who made this very interesting sari called the Pochampalli sari. And it was a machine which took a job which was manual, which was done by women. They spent 8 hours, 5 hours, sorry, trying to make a particular design. And it was literally shoulder breaking. And he automated the whole process because his mom went through the agony of doing it. And he didn't get too much of support from the government, and the weavers needed that machine. So we did crowdfunding to give the machine to weavers. And the Times of India thought it was a great idea and they wrote about it. And 3 weeks after that, he ended up winning the Padma Shri.
full circle back to Times of India.
Yeah. And uh, a few months after that, his story became so fascinating that Netflix actually made a movie around it.
Wow. And what's the name of that for the
It's
viewer?
called Malaysia.
Malaysia.
That's the name of the person. And, to look at the journey from, an entrepreneur doing crowdfunding, getting into the newspapers, winning a Padma Shri, and then becoming Netflix, all that in a span of 1.5 years was absolutely, very, very nice. And it was all led by the crowd. So I guess the crowd want to make a difference. They want to help. And Indians are actually a very, very generous lot. We don't talk about it. So a lot of times the perception is, hey, I don't think we're that generous. But we give almost 42,000 crores to NGOs. Companies give almost another 15,000 crores through CSR. And we give another 45,000 to temples and churches and mosques and gurudwaras. So that's almost a lakh of crores Indians give every year.
And
that's
proportional to the average income, that's
huge.
unheard
So
of.
we are a giving people, but we don't talk about it. And that's part of a culture. We say left hand should know what the right hand is doing. We do all those things. So I guess we just like to be modest.
And as a proportion of the total amount of money you've raised, if you want to say how much that is, you can. How much of that would be via schools? Because I thought that was an ingenious idea. right? You go to a school, tell the kids about it, they get something out of it, they can put it on their college application or whatever, and they get personal fulfillment, and you know they can reach a wider audience base to raise the amount of money that's required for a particular cause.
So our school program was, again, this is the beauty about building companies. We never visualized the school program ever when we started the company.
Yeah.
And that's the nice thing about building companies. So it's not like we were smart enough to see it. I was at a conference and I had this wonderful lady sitting next to me who heard about what we were doing. And she happened to be the principal of a school in Bangalore. Her name was Manju ma'am. And, she was the principal of this school called DPS Bangalore North. And she said, Ranga, you should do this with my students. It would really transform their lives. And why don't you do a school program? So I said, okay, let's try it out. So we actually tried it out. And they were the first school possibly in the world to do crowdfunding. And that became a very, very big program where today we work with about 21,000 students.
What?
Students have raised close to almost 50 crores on our platform. And students learn empathy. They learn very, very critical life skills, right from communication, storytelling. We even teach, like we taught you all how to make a great phone call. Seems like a simple thing, but it's a very, very critical skill. So students learn a lot. They learn to give back to, society. Oh, yes, it also happens to be good, on your college app. But that's not the real objective.
Right.
I think what you realize as a student is I can make change happen. I have good people around me. People are willing to fund a great idea as long as I do the right things. So that allows you as a student to say, look, I can change things going forward. So imagine 20 years down the line, we tell you that, look, we've trained 2 million students in India. What do you think all of you all will do in 20 years? You will become change agents.
Yeah.
That's what we really want to do.
It's like a compounding effect down the line.
Yes.
And even though I just found out you are for profit, I should have known that from before. Do you fear sometimes that you look at, at the end of the day, it's charity work? Do you fear that you look at it as too much from a numbers perspective? Because you're from a corporate background, marketing, sales, numbers.
No, actually, we don't. So if you ask me, the numbers we look at is possibly we are looking at numbers like how many people's lives are we touching. We look at those those are the good numbers, right? So we look at those. So for example, one of the campaigns you all did was about Green Soul, right? That was about touching the lives of children. So let us say, the kit costs, let's say, 950 rupees or 950 rupees. And let's say we raise 9 lakh. The way we look at it is, okay, we've impacted 1,000 kids. So actually we've raised more than 9 crores. So when you do the math, you realize you've already impacted 1 lakh.
Wow.
So in our mind, it's like we've impacted 1 lakh children with this partner called Green Soul and helped them do that. And students have actually made that happen. So that's the 1 lakh number we are looking at, saying, wow, we've done that. At the same time, you could do one heart surgery, which costs 10 lakhs, which is a complicated one. Yes, you've saved a life. So we also look at that number, saying, okay, you've saved lives, so the numbers will be small. But impacting lives, we've impacted 1 lakh people. So as a team, we realized that, hey, look, we are doing something very nice. We have impacted. So if you ask yourself a question, how many people have impacted 1 lakh people in their lifetime? Very few, right? That's how we look at numbers.
Yeah, no, that's brilliant. And of course, startups come with problems, and I'm sure you've had a fair share through both your startups. Number one, what were they? Number two, how did you overcome them? And number three, what would be your advice to people who have their own startups and are struggling to survive? What should they do to, live with the hurdles and overcome them?
So that's a good question. So I think the first thing is, problems are a part of everyday life, whether it's business or otherwise. So that's the first. Second thing is you have to embrace problems, whether you like it or not. You literally have to embrace them because they teach you a lot and you learn. And problems are of two kinds. One, problems you can fix. Second is problems that you can't fix. If you can't fix, don't even bother about it because you can't fix it. And if you can fix it, fix it. That's all you need to do. So for example, let's say when we were building this business, we had demonetization. Okay, so that really impacted our business. Can I change demonetization? The answer is no. So you don't worry about the fact that this has come and hit you. It's like you're swimming in the sea, you at the beach, and this huge wave comes over there. You can't change
You
it,
can't
saying,
stop
"Hello,
it.
why did this happen?" Right? You figure out what to do.
Yeah.
So, and by the way, you have a huge wave, even if it's a 30-footer, there's a very simple solution. You just dive
Go
into the water.
underwater.
I'm a good swimmer, so nothing happens. Anyway, coming back to where I was talking about is demonetization is staring at you. You say, great, new problem, never faced it before. Let's figure out what to do and figure out what to do. Communicate well with your team, find solutions, creative ones, smart ones, talk to others. What are you doing? Learn, be nimble, and then celebrate the fact that, okay, you fixed the problem. So a lot of times, actually, problems make you a much more cohesive team. They make you a stronger team. And that's the fun. I tell people a lot of times, imagine going to work or imagine a life without a single problem. You'll get bored within a week. Imagine a week where there is absolutely nothing goes wrong. And if it continues, after some time, you'll say, there's nothing to do in this business. Why am I even getting paid?
Fair enough.
Right. So that's how you look at problems.
Okay.
Right.
Yeah.
So even if you're a family man, you'll say, okay, I thought everything was perfect. Now I have a problem with my child. You need to fix it. You can't say, oh, why did I have a child? It doesn't work like that, right? So that's how you look at problems. So a lot of times it's about how you look at it. And you have to have fun fixing problems. That's what makes it interesting. And that's what makes it interesting even for your team, because they learn. And that becomes a part of the culture of an organization.
That's a life-changing way to look at it. It's like there's no good without bad. There's no sunny without rainy. Take the problems with the solutions and make them, come together to
True.
drive progression and growth. You're the best public speaker I know.
Already.
Straight up. I mean, there's no easy way or no, way to downplay it. You got me to do something that I would never do otherwise.
Okay.
And I think that's an achievement in itself.
I remember you saying that. Yeah.
And you're extremely persuasive when you speak. Like the first maybe 5 minutes you came and spoke, I'm like, who is this guy? What is he talking about? Why is he talking? Why do I have to be here? After that, I'm like, this sounds good. Maybe I should do this. Like, how do you get people to change their minds 180 like that?
So I guess, as I said, I really didn't have the gift of the gab or the, acumen or the ability, to be a eloquent or good speaker, as far as I remember. But I think over a period of time, one is, you obviously need to be comfortable on stage with large audiences. And that comes from one knowing about your subject very well. But I think, again, the most important thing is communicating from the perspective of the other person. Okay. The more you think about others and try and figure out how they perceive things, how they see things, what are their doubts, and if that's how you, focus your pitch to them, it becomes very, very easy for them to appreciate what you're doing. And all of us have fascinating stories to tell. The thing is, we don't learn how to tell them. We're not taught how to tell them. And what I see nowadays is, because we spend so much time on devices, we've lost the art of communication in a lot of places. So earlier, there were two kinds of families that you had in India. People who sat together and discussed things, and people who went to rooms and sat in their rooms and then met for lunch, met for breakfast, met for dinner. And if you happen to be one of those families which talked, discussed, and then went and sat for dinner, you slowly learned the art of communication. So we did that a lot as kids. I do remember my parents, whenever we had guests, a lot of parents would say, hey, come, meet uncle, auntie, and then bye-bye. And my dad would say, look, hang around, talk to us. And we got used to doing that at an early age. And because of that, you saw different people. And I remember there was a gentleman called Valence D'Souza. He was a very close family friend of ours. He was a very fascinating person for us as children. and he really knew how to communicate with children. And when he came, it was almost like a 200-watt, bulb would light up that room, and we looked forward to meeting him. And it was fun being around with him because he spoke from our perspective. So once you learn how to do that and you see that, it becomes very easy, to do it. And you realize that it's a two-way street. The more you give in terms of, fascinating stuff, the more you get back. So while we teach, and we work with students, the reason why it drives me to do it is because we learn so much from you in return. Because you all do really cool things, and we keep learning things, from all of you all, and we get better and better and better at it. So that's how it.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but I think one thing I noticed in the way you speak, you do show rather than tell. And how do you practice that? Is it conscious? Is it subconscious?
No, I think you realize that's a more effective way of communicating. And you also have to break up complex things into simple stuff. See, because for example, let's say, we work with an NGO called Akshay Patra, and these guys do midday meals for students. And the midday meals are great because, attendance goes up, all that goes up. But I can say all that to you or a student. But let's say I tell you, look, they give midday meals to students and it only costs so much. It costs only 1,500. Now, when I say that, these are just numbers. But the moment I tell you that, and I give you an example and say, okay, how much does a Starbucks coffee cost? Okay. And you say, 400 rupees. Great. I said, one Starbucks coffee costs 400. The Akshay Patra guys give 232 meals for 1,500. So what does it mean? One Starbucks coffee can feed a child for 3 months. When I say that to you, it's easy for you to visualize. And you say, what? One Starbucks coffee feeds a child for 3 months.
That's ridiculous.
And I say, each sip feeds a child for 1 week. Now, that sip is not a very tasty sip anymore.
It's no longer tasty.
Right? So now you're visualizing. But if I said it was 1,500, it would be meaningless to you. You don't relate to it. So you need to understand how to communicate with people so that they understand, they visualize, they imagine because of the way you put it. So I've used a reference and now it's become a fascinating story. And now you're like, okay, this is cool. And then we say things like, for example, I want you to understand how big a deal this meal is for children. I can either tell you it's a big deal for children. Again, that's meaningless for you. But I then tell you that, look, I spoke to 10 of these children. I've actually spoken to hundreds of them. And I asked these children, what is it you don't like about your school? And these people go to government schools. So most children in schools say, okay, maybe the toilets, maybe, the classrooms, maybe the infra. And I say, no. 5 out of 10 children, what they don't like about the school is closed on Saturdays and Sundays. So they don't get their midday meal. Wow. Now you understand how important the midday meal is. But if I said it's important, there's no impact. Yeah. So how you tell a story, that's what I mean by it. And this is understanding consumers, understanding you all, and making it interesting. And it just takes a little effort. And once you learn how to do it, you learn to do it for almost anything and everything. And that's how good teachers teach and good communicators communicate. Not by just saying it's bad, it's good, it's tough for them. Understand it. You don't understand it that way.
That's brilliant. What's your vision for the future of FuelADream?
So I, want FuelADream to continue doing what we do. And I think our vision is we want to create change makers, people like you, students, corporate people. So yesterday I was teaching a corporate in Bombay. And one of the persons at the end of it said, yeah, I'll take part, but I just have a question. And I said, yes. He says, my daughter, she studies in this school. She's also done the same program. Okay, and now I'm going to do it. And I use my email ID for her account. So do I need to create a new email ID? And I said, yeah, you'll have to do it. But I was so thrilled that, now I have a parent and a child both doing it, right? So what happens is when we do these things, I think we just creating a lot of goodwill. We're giving people an opportunity to help others. And that's really what the whole vision of, FuelADream was about, that we become a society where we feel good about helping others. we feel nice about it. We get our tax benefits, we get feedback about it. And end of the day, hopefully, literally the world becomes a better place. But that's really what the whole mission is about.
That's great. Mr. Ranganath Thota, it's a pleasure. It's
Thank
been an
you.
honor.
My
Thank you.
pleasure. Yeah. So the first time I've done this.